Welcome back. You're watching Sokoni here on Morning Prime, and this is the last lane of course, the program as we critically analyze the current development that we have in the country with the formation of a cabinet, which many are saying that this is such a disconsolate. We have disconsolate opinions that is coming from the Gen Zs regarding this constitution of the cabinet. But will they deliver? We're seeing some of the critical things that they need to do, especially for the Ministry of Treasury, to try and stabilize the economy as it is, not coming up with new magical words, but just trying to put things in proper perspective. And one of the pivotal questions that we were raising is maybe also how the central bank needs to be uncoupled from the Treasury. And we don't have the governor being beholden to the political intrigues of the day. And we have a scenario where we had it before, that we have coming or incoming government decrying the fact that they're inheriting empty coffers. And I'm still holding court with Professor Dominic Mwenja, who is the chair of the Central Bank Pension Fund. And also we have a chair of Kenya Development Corporation. This is Bonyasi Sakwa. And earlier on also we had the chair of KEPSA Foundation. This is Engineer Patrick Opath. He stepped out a bit, but of course he will be back momentarily due to some pressing issues that he had to address as well. But let's come to you, Prof, and critically analyze, first of all, that issue from your own assessment. I know maybe because you are leaning on that particular side, it would be hard for you to speak on that particular front of uncoupling central bank from Treasury. That has been in the public domain, and we need an insulation of the central governor from the political gimmicks of a day, where calls are made and also funds are driven out of a central bank without the process propriety that is required.
Yeah, I think it's not a bad idea. If you look at what's happening with the US, the Fed is very independent.
It's very independent.
And therefore, they're able to make independent long-term decisions that are sometimes contrary to what the executive wants. Because if the monetary policy and the fiscal policy of a country are somehow too mixed up, it becomes a big problem. Now, if you look, even the exchequer in the UK, is independent of the mother ministry, whichever the mother ministry is. So it's not a bad conversation to have at some point, so that independence can allow for decision making that is more long term and is more nuanced also at the same time. Because sometimes when you make political decisions, sometimes you sacrifice some of the details that actually make a difference later in life. Now going back to what Mheshimiwa was talking about in terms of the concentration, the elite and all that, let me give you some before I come to these two books here, that seem to address some of the problems that we are facing, not only in Kenya, but in a lot of developing countries. Did you know that 0.1% of Kenyans, that is about 8,300 Kenyans, control 25% of Kenya's wealth? That is the Pareto principle. Okay? Right. 0.1%. 0.1%. Control 25%. If you take the top 10% of the Kenyan elite, they control 60% of Kenya's wealth. Now you start to see where the problem is. Then you got that other 40% that control, the 90% that control the 40%. If you start breaking that down, then you find that the bottom 70%, probably one of the poorest. That's where the bottom up was coming in. This at the bottom is very wide. So what do? We need to move these people from here into here in a multi-sectoral approach, which is holistic and ecosystem built for everybody else. Now let me come to these two books here that was and it addresses some of these issues directly. And I'll start the one that says Why Nations Fail. So the title is The Origins of Poverty, Prosperity and Power. Well, it would be nice just to raise it up so that at least also Mandela, my colleague, may just capture that. I don't know whether you have captured that. Yes, Why Nation Fails, for them that are not privy with the book as well, The Origins of Power, Prosperity and Poverty. You can read out the... You can see that. That's too high. Just raise it up a bit. That speech. Just raise it up a bit. Or Mandela will... Yes, there you are. Why Nations Fail, The Origins of Power, Prosperity, and Poverty. Now, the authors here have gone into historical facts from different countries, the global north and the global south. And as they look at this, I've come with several things, and allow me to kind of summarize some of them, is the huge differences between income and standard of living that separate the rich countries of the global north from those of the global south. And there are several things. One, the root of discontent in the global south is their levels of poverty. We just talked about 0.1% controlling 25% of the wealth and 10% controlling 60% of the wealth. That's number one. Then the others argue, if you listen to what people are saying about the problems they are facing and why they rise up against government, their own government, you should be able to hear what they are saying, and what they tend to say actually happens to be the truth. Number three, it says some of the things that they say across the board in many countries that they have looked at, the number one problem is corruption. That is not only here, in many countries that the authors have looked at. Number two is oppression. There's a freedom of movement, the freedom of speech, and all those other things that you're talking about. Number four is education. The education system that's not accessible to all, and therefore a small minority form an elite that end up controlling a majority of the resources in the country. Number four, inability of government to deliver public services. Those are the four top reasons why the poor countries have remained poor. Now, the root cause of all this problem is political. So what they're arguing is, if we fix the politics, we will fix the rest of the problems that the country faces, because most of the productive capability is directly or indirectly controlled by the political actors that are in the system. Now, they go ahead and say economists and policy pundits argue that those in power simply do not understand or even know what is needed to make their country prosperous, and they have followed incorrect policies and strategies in the past. And we see that. You say, oh, they got bad advice there, they didn't have good advice, they are not following this, they are not following that. Then they say that if these rules would only rulers would only get the right advice from the right advisors, prosperity would follow. That's what the elite are telling us. That's what the pundits and the economists are telling us. These people need just to have the right policies and the right advisors and the problem, which now goes to what the next book is talking about, which is
The Tyranny of Experts.
The Tyranny of Experts
By William Easterly.
Economists, Dictators, and the Forgotten Rights of the Poor by William Easterly. Now, before I jump to this...
Bunyasi, was that your...
old colleague?
That's an old colleague at
World Bank?
Yeah.
Oh,
World Bank.
Okay.
And he understands, his thinking was so antithetical to what the World Bank was doing at that time, that he was actually able to observe some of these problems that are facing third world countries and developing countries. And because I work in a few African countries and I deal with some of these things, we can see some of the arguments that he has here actually very valid. But I need to also do one thing. Back to this book here now. To the academics and pundits, the fact that the country rulers is ruled by narrow elites that take care of their own interests at the expense of society, that seems irrelevant to them, to the understanding of the country's economic problems. But the authors argue, those in the street demonstrating against their own governments have the right idea and not the academics and the pundits. So what the author here is saying, if you listen to the people, you will be able to understand what problems are facing the country, because they live the problems. They live in those problems.
They have the realities.
They have the reality on the ground. And therefore, as we listen to them, we start fixing our policies, our government, and our politics that address some of the issues they're talking about, which now goes back now to what the Gen Zs are telling us. They're telling us, you older folks, you are living your future today because you're okay. You're in your 50s and 60s and you're living your future. We have not started living our future. So please don't screw it up for us. And this is what we want to happen. We want good governance. We want clean politics. We want good policies that support the inclusion of everybody within the political and economic actors. having them told us that, and in a way, as I look at what the president is trying to do and what he has tried to do, which, by the way, I've been a CEO, and I know, and you've been CEO, and I know when you have the core team that's working with you is a very personal issue as a CEO. And you want somebody who will take care of your company, you want somebody who will take care of your customers, you want somebody who will take care of the things that affect your own organization and your people. However, on the political side, you have to consider a lot of things. You have to consider the politics, you have to consider the next elections that are coming, so it becomes a bit complicated to get all these things done. Now, let me go back to the tyranny of experts and make a few points here. The author points out the issue of human rights mistakes made from deals with corrupt regimes and self-interested organizations. Okay, and this is somebody who used to work for the World Bank. That's one of the issues that he's looking at. Why international development economics should fundamentally rethink its premises and practices is one of the reasons why we should start looking at how we fight poverty in a lot of global south countries. So failure of anti-poverty programs associated with some of these international bodies and its political and private sector supporters. So what Easterly is doing, he's telling us this has been the architecture of the premise of economic development for the poor countries. It hasn't worked because of these things. And therefore, we need to change some of these things. And I remember President Ruto, when he came on board, at the very beginning, that's some of the things he had started addressing. You know, the finance architecture, and how do we change that in order for it to start driving economic development and the right policies that do not retard development in each of those countries. Then he says, knowledge and expertise are fountainheads of prosperity and freedom. Yet experts, and especially foreign experts, have frequently been instruments to the very oppression that they seek. You're talking about the tyranny of experts. They come up with policies that sometimes do not apply. And this, in strategy, that's what we call using a Muthaiga strategy to fix a Kibera problem. You can't do that, because Kibera problems are very unique to Kibera and to those people at the bottom. The Muthaiga problems are very unique to that class of individuals within Muthaiga itself. And therefore, we cannot have one-size-fits-all policies that some of these guys force into the developing countries. It doesn't work. And that's where the issue of IMF comes in, the issue of World Bank comes in, the issue of others, is using a first world solution for a third world problem, which actually will probably not work.
But if we may just probe on that particular policies and maybe solutions that they designed, but would we say these solutions, they are specifically designed to engender certain agenda as well, especially when we're talking about the global south, that will always be having our pail in the hand. It is not really to empower us to grow and be independent and self-sufficient at the end of the day. It is for us to perpetually have the pail in the hand proffered to the West, so that we are beholden to them with these particular policies, just as we've seen.
And he goes, the author actually goes quite deep in that. We also know, and you remember, the term sustainable economic development has been used on developing countries for the last 60 years, and especially African countries. You cannot be talking about sustainable economic development for 60 years. And I remember President Museveni some time back questioning the same rationale, where you cannot be pregnant for 60 years. Something has to give. And if you look at the countries that have actually taken off over the last 30, 40 years, they have had their decisions come from within. They may have external aid at some point. If you look at South Korea, and I'd like to give you examples of South Korea, which we at the same time, around 1965, 66, we are almost at par with South Korea. Then what happened to President Park in 1967? He realized that given what they have in South Korea, they cannot be able to grow economically as a country. He has to go outside, not for money, but for talent. And therefore, because they have a commonality of goals, and that's why I was saying, even with this cabinet that the president is putting together, if there's no behavioral integration within the cabinet, and everybody is taking care of their own interests, we shall not go anywhere. And the chorus therefore should be revive the economy, stabilize the economy, create jobs, create production in ways that Kenyans benefit from what all of us are doing.
Thank you.
So President Park went outside. He got all the Koreans that were in the US, in Europe, in Japan, and told them, you need to come home. Mm-hmm. And when you come home, help us to develop our country. That's called reverse brain drain. When he did that, when he went to the US, he went to Princeton and other campuses, and they told him, Mr. President, we don't have institutions that are as complex as we have in this country to help Korea develop. He went home and he created the Korea Institute of Technology. And also all those professors and doctors that were in, and that created now the big corporations that you see. The technology that you see in South Korea was created from that group.
Which is a complete departure of what the current administration is actually promising or trying to push, that we have some of our best brains as well who are lacking jobs here. To go to abroad to seek employment at the end of the day. We saw with Kibaki as well, he was imploring their diasporans to come back home and build a country, the reverse brain drain that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I want to just to, because on the issue of, because we have the National Council of Population and Development coming up with the projection that in 2030, the population will have grown by 7 million. By 7 million, we're a ballpark figure of 54 million right now, adding to 7 million. This is by 2030. We're only just like 6 years shy to 2030. And critical issues that you've raised, looking at the economy, looking at the education sector, that will be another chalk pain point that will be there if we don't do something about the education. Because we can see even the issues and the struggles of capitation right now with the free primary education, that is becoming a headache for the government, because we have all this mass production, so to speak, from the lower level of education now pumped into the secondary. We cannot absorb. We don't have enough facilities. With the CBC as well, we're still trying to shake into place. I mean, this is a ticking time bomb amidst other issues like also access to health as well. So in light of this, because we have a Gen Zs, we have also other institutions projecting that by 2050, also Africa will have the oldest, the older demographics. Yeah, these are the Gen Zs that we're talking about by then. Will be in that particular, will become actually the oldest continent in the world as well. So it will be a flip of what is happening to Europe, and we can speak about other continents as well. But I just wanted to speak in light of what has been projected by NCPD.
A couple of things I'd like to say. Very quickly on this one, on the one that Professor just commented on, I think we should remember that when we get public policies that encourage nationals to go find jobs overseas, it's not all doom. India has benefited a lot by having their diaspora, both remittances and imports of technology. Has been done by the Indians in diaspora. Some have stayed out there, and as you know, they're rising all the way to the top everywhere. It's been very supportive. I think other things that happened there is the way they managed their economy in ways that are very restrictive, releasing only what they think they can afford to release to liberalize them. Okay, that's what we can get into later. So that instead of having our graduates, primary or secondary school or university sitting here, they can go somewhere else, they'll gain a skill and they'll come back and they'll be much more useful members of the society. And in the interim, remittances will have eased off part of the task. There's no shortfall of warm bodies in this country. But let's go a bit to the sort of children was high. And because health was improving, the death rates at baby level, at a young age, were reducing. Babies are not dying before age 1, age 5. They were growing beyond that. They still are levels at which we should reduce, definitely. But it has improved greatly from the colonial days when we had extremely high mortality rates. And you still have unequals. When Obama was here, he used an example that may have flown over people's heads. And he said, in the aggregate, he said, for example, why should a child, why does the life expectancy of a child born in Nyanza be so much lower than the life expectancy of somebody born, using his own word, he said, in central Kenya? Meaning, you know, one side may have better condition than another. Part of that answer, of course, is that malaria is not so endemic in central Kenya as it is in Nyanza. Therefore, what do you do about areas where malaria is endemic to ensure that survival rates and so on? That's the direction, the way you direct resources, okay? And that's not ethnicity, no. It's not tribalism, no. It's geography. And it brings this new force to the field. So, given that, we have time between now and 2050 for the 2050 projections. We have time since the census to 2030 at those 7 million increases. The question is, what do we do in a way that anticipates that in providing the resources, in modulating policy so that it's pro-employment, for example. And where people go, people will find their own space if the society is, you know, if you're providing resources. That's why, as we said a bit earlier, even pending bills is a way in which you ease off the unemployment stress, because these same contractors and others are the ones who plow back and reinvest and buy shares in companies that then helps them to expand their businesses and so on. You can't kill one thing and think one side and think the rest of it will take care of itself. So some countries will be better prepared to deal with the problem, but even those who will not will know in advance that we are not coping. At this rate, we're not able to provide for whether it is employment opportunities, whether it's food security, educational service. So then what do you do? And that's when governments go out sometimes and borrow. And if you're borrowing for that and putting them clearly in areas of that priority, you can close the gap. Right. But if you're borrowing and the money does not reach the shores of Kenya, that's why the problems arise.
That's a good point. Just hang on there so that we also get a sentiment of what the President was saying yesterday regarding some of the reforms that he wants to see, and clamping corruption, conflict of interest is one of them. We talked earlier also on the streamlining of the procurement rules in this country, and we can see the government is also raising that target to 164 billion shillings debt that is going for other, debt, so that it may try and plug the holes that has been created, especially with the finance bill, where they are having shortfalls. But let's just listen in to what the President had to say yesterday regarding the conflict of interest bill and the procurement, of course, in the civil service, where he says this is where the epicenter, where corruption thrives, and we need to lance the boil.
Within 90 days, we shall propose amendments to the Public Finance Management Act and Public Procurement and Disposal Acts to overhaul the institutional and operational framework of public procurement, which has been identified as the epicenter of corruption, conflict of interest, and abuses of office in the public sector, with a view to deploying digital infrastructure within the next 6 months. The aim of this measure is to provide an open and transparent public procurement platform which gives open, real-time, and end-to-end public visibility of public procurement from advertisement to award of contract. I have engaged with the parliamentary leadership and asked Parliament to expeditiously pass the Conflict of Interest Bill with the explicit caveat that I shall veto any bill enacted if it does not establish the highest bar with respect to accountability, integrity, and anti-corruption. I will make full use of the power given to me under Article 115 of the Constitution to make sure that the bill meets the appropriate standards set out in the original bill.
Yeah, so there has been a heightened debate on the conflict of interest bill as well, as you know it. And people are raising questions regarding all these legislations that we do have. They have been enough, or we do have enough legislations when it comes to anti-corruption and what else do we have on that particular arena? Anti-corruption and money laundering and conflict of interest bill. So they say Kenyans don't really care about all these legislations because you might have all these good legislations. You're talking about, was it South Korea, right? Right, and they borrowed heavily from Kenya to where they are right now. Can we talk just briefly on this? Because I know, Bunyasi Sako, you've been also on the floor of the House, your bill as well, a very sterling bill that everyone was expecting that at least it will be a prime solution on capping the debt in this country. Where are they headed? You know, we've done something with procurement before. We have the polygraph before, the lie detectors before, the sending off of the procurement officers from the civil service, you know, for a year. But still, the problem is there. So is the problem the legislation, or the problem is the mindset and the culture that is so backed into a system that has to, you know, be draining the swamp, as they say?
You want Professor to go?
Right. All right, Professor, let's just begin with you.
Oh, you want to start with me? Okay. The issue of corruption, and I think we mentioned this here last time. The word corruption is a very amorphous word.
All right. I think there's something coming up from your mic, or maybe you just need to be still a bit.
Oh,
so if you fidget, just be still a bit.
There's something very, corruption is very amorphous. And if you look at the US, for example, and when they start talking about corruption, they're talking about very specific things that are corrupt, and therefore the guidelines for sentencing and all that stuff is geared towards that. If it's theft, it is theft. Somebody has stolen, somebody has stolen. If it is misappropriation, it is misappropriation. If it is extortion, it is extortion, and they should be charged as such. But when you use the word corruption, it doesn't really mean a lot of things. It doesn't have teeth. So you have to separate that. You stole this money, these are the consequences. You corrupted the system in order to provide you with an opportunity to steal. That is also chargeable. And if we are able to do that, and it's very difficult. Am I still?
Yeah, just continue.
And it's very difficult.
Do you have a challenge? I think I do have a challenge with the mic. Let me try just so we'll fix the bit. Yeah, we'll come back to you. You want to chime in?
Okay.
Just as I try and fix that particular mic, or.
Okay. Let's see. I have to pick up where Prof left off.
And that's the question of these policies that we know coming up with that. The president says in 90 days, the conflict of interest bill. Of course, we'll have the purging of a procurement in this country where it's the epicenter. These are the things I was asking. Do we need those legislations? Because they don't bring any discernible difference at the end of the day. We've had enough of them. The implementation is a different kettle of fish altogether.
Yes. I think that we have some problem. Let me start upstream a bit. One of the challenges we have in Kenya is that you don't see the meeting areas between the different arms of government. The parliament is busy churning out that legislation, and assuming it's not challenged in court, it's signed and it takes hold. The judiciary the executive has to deal with its implementation and allow complaints to be raised that may end up in court. It goes to the court is operating entirely in its own domain. In these countries where we had rapid development, there seems to be much better communication between the executive and the judiciary, for example, without one appearing to direct the other. Even in the US, by the time cases go to court, you find that they normally would end up catching people. People rarely go to court with an obvious case and then, like it is here, there was no evidence, they couldn't trace this. There's a lack of synergy across these institutions and so on. And then I think one problem in Kenya, which we really must address, is that there is variable degree of fairness depending on your wealth status. Wealth status here affects whether you are charged or not charged and how you are charged or how you are treated. It does a hell of a lot. And that's a big area that Professor and others, I think, who look at these big questions of society should look at. So it doesn't work as well as it should. So legislation, yes. The moment you realize it's there's an area where the law doesn't cover clearly, you should amend that. But implementation now becomes
something different.
Something quite different.
Right. So you're saying corruption is amorphous. We need to be more specific. Specificity is of essence when it comes to fighting corruption. Because when you talk about corruption, it is a big abstract. What is that?
Abstraction. So when we narrow it down, it becomes easy to start looking at how people, and the statutes are there. The laws are already there. We don't need them. We just need to build an ecosystem about fairness in terms of executing justice for those who are corrupt. And they are corrupt because they steal, they are corrupt because they misappropriate, they are corrupt because they extort. Once you do that, it becomes easy to catch folks. And once you catch folks, then it goes now to the other ecosystem that has to be built from the investigators to the judges, the DPP's office, and all those things is a whole ecosystem that needs to be refined. And and I would like to hear the president say, we'll look at the judiciary and we make sure the judges are not corrupted. We'll look at the investigating officers to make sure they are not. And if you are caught, these are because you get a crime that you know was committed. By the time the investigators get to the DPP, if they are corrupted in between there, then their case becomes weaker when it goes to DPP.
And of course, we've seen the DPP.
And it happens all the time. And when it gets there, it gets to the judges will definitely throw those cases out. So it has to be an ecosystem that has to be built, and that has to take leadership from the very top.
So the circles are very concentric, beginning with the legislation. It will affect, of course, the investigation. And we've seen the DPP himself also decrying the fact that he gets some sloppy evidence.
Very substantial.
He wants some credible evidence so that at least these cases as well, they see the light of day. All right, but let me just prime you on what is happening currently, where also your fuel is bound to go up, not because of the road levy, but now because also there is the cost element that comes with the transport and storage. The cost of transporting and storing fuel using Kenya Pipeline Company's infrastructure increased from this month in a move that will impact pump prices in the coming months. Transport charges per cubic meter rose by 6.75% to 5.44 from 5.12 shillings, while storage fees at KPC's 4 depots increased by up to 7.9% to 4,175 per cubic meter. The new rates are part of 3-year cycle, which started in July 2022 in a bid to offer KPC higher revenues from handling local and transit fuel. Higher tariffs did not impact pump prices in the monthly pricing schedule announced on July the 14th, mainly due to the drop in the landed cost of fuel. However, the impact of the higher tariffs is likely to be felt if the landed costs rise in the coming months. The price of diesel fell by 1.50 shillings to 171.6 per litre in Nairobi, while that of petrol dropped by 150 shillings to 1 shillings and 50 cents, I should say, to 188.84 per litre in the capital. Landed cost of petrol fell by 4.65%. Let's see how also the Nairobi Security Exchange is faring right now, where the share of investors' wealth concentrated on the 5 largest companies at the Nairobi Securities Exchange has fallen to 66% from high of 81% 3 years ago, reflecting the fall in shares prices of the market's blue chip stocks in the period. As per yesterday's closing shares prices, that is actually on Tuesday, the combined market valuation of Safaricom Equity Group, EABL, KCB Group and Absa Bank Kenya stood at 1 shilling and 0.9 trillion. That is against the NSE's total market capitalization of 1.67 trillion shillings. NSE's data shows that at the end of the second quarter of the 2021, the top 5 firms at the time that is Safaricom, Equity, KCB, EABL, and Cooperative Bank of Kenya, accounted for 2.2 trillion shillings out of the market's total investors' wealth of 2.7 trillion shillings in its latest market soundness report. Also, the Capital Markets Authority said that although market concentration remains a significant risk, there is a positive trend towards better distribution of wealth in the market as investors eye other companies that can offer capital gains. All right, let's turn our focus now on the Kenya Development Corporation, which is seeking to write off interest and penalties on defaulted loans tapped as far back as the 1960s that have ballooned to over 31 billion shillings. According to management report, KDC wants to apply the in duplam rule, which provides that interest on a loan stops accumulating when it equals the principal. This means that interest on loans of 1.36 billion shillings borrowed between 1965 and 2008 will not rise beyond the principal as part of efforts to clean the finance's balance sheet. Presently, interest and penalties on the defaulted loans of 511.3 million shillings have ballooned to 30.5 billion shillings, pushing the unpaid loans to 31.8 billion shillings. KDC is in the final stages of restructuring the legacy loan portfolio in compliance with the in duplam rules as set out in Section 44 of the Banking Act and as enforced by various courts. That is what the management report read. And we know KDC inherited the legacy loans from the Industrial and Commercial Development Corporation, ICDC, which was set up after Kenya's independence to provide long-term financing to business, especially micro, small, and medium enterprises. And of course, Punyasi Sako, you're the chair. You'll tell us on this latest development from you as well. Huge, also defaulting, as far as, despite the fact that we have this as well, we have also huge defaulting of loans within your corporations.
Thank you very much, Debash. The problem, of course, with newspaper reporting is that it sort of picks up bits and pieces that sort of spice up the story. That's embedded in the nature of the trade. Mm-hmm. As was indicated there, the KDC is a product of three institutions that were brought together: ICDC, Tourist Finance Corporation of Kenya, and the IDB. Later was called IDB Capital. IDB is a relatively young institution, started in the early 70s. Tourist Finance Corporation, I don't remember exactly the date, but a little older than that. Mm-hmm. And ICDC was brought in right at the beginning of independence era to try and deal with the Africanization of the economy. But I think they did a sterling job over those years. There's not much you see today that is part of the old money now that hasn't come through the hands of ICDC. Mm-hmm. ICDC has been really, really important in doing that. However, the management of the loans had periods of laxity, I would say, where they went into arrears. There might have been tough economic circumstances, so people did not pay, and sometimes there was a close relationship between the borrowers and power. And when you have that kind of relationship, payments become a challenge in those old days. You know, it's something that we're struggling now to say, let borrowers be qualified entirely as borrowers following certain criteria rather than by who they are in society. But at the same time, you can't deny a loan to somebody who is a good business person and is also a public servant or something like that. You can't. You know, you have to really play up that properly and so on. Now, KDC has already provided for, when loans go into arrears, there are general rules that are applied. If a loan, for example, is maybe 3 months beyond its repayment date, you, in reflecting it in your books, you can't say, I'll receive all this money in this period, because some of it will not come. So you begin to discount it a bit by a certain proportion that within the guidelines of good accounting standards are done, and each institution adopts those. Now, the 30 billion, 31 billion or so, is money that over the years has already been fully provided for in the books of KDC. What does providing mean, provision? What that means is simply that you take it out of consideration as active money that will be invested to generate income, because it is not going to be paid or has not been paid altogether. However, that does not mean that you take it out and you throw it in the dustbin. It simply means you will now do the collections in the background, but you are trying to leave a proportion of that money that is reasonably active to give a fair idea of how well the enterprise as a going concern is going to perform. But these monies that you have made a provision for are monies that have still got to be paid. Mm-hmm. If they are not paid or are not payable for any proper reason, the law provides that you can write it off. That it can be written off, meaning you release the borrower from obligation to pay and so on and so forth. It's, in a sense, it's a loss absorbed by the taxpayer, so to say. Now, that is not allowed in our laws easily. In the PFM Act, and there are other side issues important, like the banking section 44, the diploma rule. I say something small about that. So what happens is what KDC has to do is to provide data and information and justification. Why those laws that have been provided for are no longer in the accounts of KDC should be written off completely, meaning they should discharge the borrowers from payment at all. It's not granted easily. I know they have been at it. I've been in this thing for a year, and I know they have made a lot of efforts prior to the time I came and as I speak. Treasury doesn't grant that permission easily. You have to demonstrate, for example, that maybe the enterprise failed miserably for reasons beyond that of the borrower or the operator, and that the security that you had at the beginning has not been able to realize that money, and under various considerations, tight controls. So you don't get this to become a back window, which you can borrow money, default, and the loan is written off. No, it is a much more rigorous process that there is to be done.
I thought that would be the easy way out.
No,
it's borrow, then try and have some jigger ways of evading. Then the law comes into play.
And now I'm glad that Honorable Mbadi again is in Treasury. Mbadi was one of the major authors of the PFM Act.
Yes.
And he's also one of the greatest practitioners around it. He's always making great reference to it. That's one. So he understands the issues there very well, and I hope that he'll bring out some greater clarity on what should be done. You can't stop it altogether, but you don't allow it to be done nilly-willy.
All right. So this is a foregone conclusion that all these loans with in Duplam, now that will come.
Now, sorry. What's the Duplam? Duplam came in.
Just very briefly, because my music is up. Yes.
Oh yeah.
We're winding up.
That came in because it's senseless to continue charging interest on a loan which is not performing, where it's unlikely to be performing. So some rule was established to say that the interest earned should not exceed the principal given. There are some challenges there. Inflation is in there and so on and so forth. That has been done, but beyond that, after you have provided for that, for example, KDC says, and I presume this is correct, it's historical, so it's difficult to see it clearly, that the amount of principal given originally, cumulatively, was about 1.3 something billion shillings. But over the years, it's grown to over 30. So a lot of it was, I think, to use the High Court's, the Supreme Court's information, was hot air. And they're trying to cut out the hot air.
All right, thank you. Prof, my music is up. Maybe you can just get to your closing remarks.
Yeah, my closing remark briefly goes towards the KDC and what you're looking at. I've been advocating the setting up of small business administration within the Office of the President or within the Treasury, where the loaning is actually lowered all the way to the ward level or to the sub-county level through SBA offices at county level. and collapse all this money that is within the Hustler Fund, within KCD, within this fund and this fund into SBA, work with the banks, and the banks provide the loan guarantee, and these people are vetted by SBA officials at the ward and the sub-county level, such that the businesses they are investing in, there are people who know where they live. And that would solve our problems on access to funding and MSMEs.
Thank you. Thank you. I wish we could glean more, but of course we're pinched for time. I want to thank you, the chair of Kenya Development Corporation. This is Mwenyezi Sako for coming through as well, and also the chair of CBK Pension Fund. This is Professor Dominic Mwenja in absentia. I want to thank the chair of KEPSA Foundation, Engineer Patrick Abath as well, who was here earlier and he took off due to urgent pressing concerns as well. Thank you for your valued company. We hope that we continue pace, of course, with what has been going on in terms of coverage and the agitation of the Gen Zs regarding the reforms that they do want. And we know also the shilling has been spooked by the current process as it stands. We didn't give you that now we can see it's vacillating between 30 and 135 because of the ongoing political instability in the country. We hope that will stabilize and it will be going back to where it was. Thank you for your valued company. News Diary is up next.